Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Well, I've been away for a little while. Things got kind of crazy there for a bit, but got a little bit more free time now, and I'm hoping to do videos for you guys on a more regular basis. So, what are we taking a look at today? Well, this is an interesting one. This is a game that's actually fairly legendary among Commodore 64 fanatics, but which I had basically never heard about until recently. I don't know how I missed this back in the day, but my buddy Evan actually recommended this title to me, so it's pretty cool. So we're taking a look at a rather unique sort of shooter strategy title, I guess if you want to call it that, called Paradroid. And we're looking at the Commodore 64 version. This did come out on a number of different platforms. And I really like it because it's weird. It's weird, but weird in cool ways. So, what's the point of this game? Well, the point is that at some nebulous point in the future, a bunch of robots have turned against their masters and taken over this intergalactic spaceship. That's the gist of it. There ain't much in the way of story here. And what you are doing is controlling this little dude here, which is called the influence device, which is a device that was constructed to go in and basically reclaim this ship for its rightful masters. And what's neat about this game is that there's a couple of different ways you can do this. So you can see that there's a whole bunch of other black robots going around, or black designated robots going around. And you have a couple of different ways with which you can remove them from the ship. You can either destroy them, as I've been doing here, which is one way to do it. You can destroy them by shooting them. You can destroy them eventually by running into them enough times. Or you can do something a little bit different and cool, which is a lot more risk-reward, but can prove to be much to your advantage later on. And I'm going to show you that right now. So you can capture them. Now, this tends to go by fairly quick, so it may be hard for me to explain it while I'm doing it here, but let's see what we can pull off. So, in order to capture a robot, you're playing a little mini-game here, and your objective is to... and I've lost it. Your objective is to basically hack the robot's computer core so that you can assume control of it. Now, you're going to see by failing this, I died. So... this is what's interesting, because essentially Paradroid is a very complicated score attack arcade game. That's really the objective of this thing. And so your goal is to get as many points as possible while exterminating all the robots on this ship that you're on. And the way you do that is killing them, blowing them up like that, gets you some points. But capturing them is really ultimately how you get the majority of... that's how you get the high score in this game. And ultimately how you survive the different decks of the ship you're on. There are quite a number of different decks. And you have to... ultimately the way you're going to survive the higher level decks is by assuming control of these different droids and utilizing that to your advantage. What's cool about this is you'll notice that every droid that I'm looking at here has a designator on it. So my little dude, which is the lowest form, is 001. And you'll see droids with all these different designators on them. Now, basically all these sequences of numbers represent different levels and capabilities that the different droids have. Now, ideally, the way this works is once you've played this enough, you start to get a feel for which droids have which properties. And by doing that, you will learn which ones to take over at the best times to sort of maximize your advantage. As you're learning the game... the way you can do that is when you attempt to take over a droid. For example, I just took over 139, which you can see is a disposal unit. So a disposal unit will have certain attributes. And by taking over one of these units, you can learn its attributes by doing that. All right, I think I got him here. Or there are also terminals on some of the decks of the ship, which will just contain sort of a mini encyclopedia that will show the attributes of the different bots, and you can learn it that way. So you see now, I've taken him over. I'm 139. So different bots will have different attributes, like, for example, some of them are faster, some of them have higher ramming capabilities, some of them have more powerful guns, some of them have more powerful armor, so they can absorb more hits. All sorts of different things like that. And this becomes very key later on, because as I'm going to show you here in a second... there are a number of different decks on this ship that you're attacking. So ultimately, over the course of the game, you have to clear out every one of these decks. And that is a rather daunting task because when you die, it's game over. So if you've cleared out a few decks and you die, you got to start all over again. And as you can see here, you'll see that this white tube here is lit up. And that's basically the elevator that I've gone into. So there are elevators spread throughout the levels, and different elevators connect to different decks. So if you want to get to every deck, you have to make sure to strategize and plan out your route so that you will get to all the elevators that you need to get to in order to move to different decks. So the neat thing about this is your objective is ultimately to clear out an entire deck, but you can move on to other decks without having done that. So you can kind of go to and fro if you want. Now you see here this deck just went dark, which means that I've taken out the last robot. So this deck is now safe. I can still come and go from here as I please, but if I come back, there'll be no more droids to take out. So that's the thing with that. In addition to that, on the decks, you'll see these little things here. These are essentially health recharge stations. So you will take damage both over time and, of course, from getting hit by other Paradroids. And when there is no actual health meter, which is one of the gnarly tricks of this game, but if your health starts to get low, your guy will start to blink, which indicates, hey, you got to recharge here quick, and because if you take too long, you'll just blow up, and that's the end of that. So here you see, for example, this is one of those terminals that I talked about. So you see here, so here's information on the Paradroid that I assumed. So he's entry 3, class disposal, there's his weight, his drive, brain, armament, sensors, and even a little bit of a explanation there, a little bit of a backstory. So that's kind of cool. So this is what's really interesting about this, that you can attack this game in a lot of different ways, and the levels actually sometimes change with subsequent playthroughs. This is not the same level 1 that I've played every time I've played this game, which I think is pretty cool. And you can attack the ship in essentially any way you want, but some of the decks are a lot tougher than other decks. So if you decide to be really ballsy and step into a place that you shouldn't, well, the challenge may be fairly high for you. You're also going to see, oh, now you see here, this guy's actually an attacking one. So now I can try to assume him. This is a maintenance robot. So the way this minigame works is your goal is to turn as much of the center core to you as possible. So when this starts, you get to pick what side that you want to play on, which side you wish to try to assume. And you want to try to figure that out as quickly as you can, because some sides in one of these battles are easier than others. So you see I won it again there. Aw, and I just got taken out at the same time. So that's the other thing that is good about assuming control of other robots, because I keep calling them robots, but they're Paradroids, really. The advantage of assuming them is that you get yourself essentially a second life or another round of hit points. When you take control, when you're the influence device, which is the little 001 dude, you can only take one hit. When you take that hit, you're done. So you're in kind of a bad way if you lose that. But if you take control of another Paradroid, he can get destroyed, and then you can get destroyed. So you get yourself sort of an extra layer of health there. So I got screwed over there because the guy I assumed got blown up just after I took control of him, and then I got hit again, and that was the end of me. And this is sort of how the thing goes. Your objective is to try to clean out the entirety of this ship while amassing as high a score as possible. So there's a lot of depth to this and a lot of different ways you can approach the game, which is what I really, really like about it. I think it's very neat the way it goes about some of these mechanics and such. And, you know, it's not the easiest thing in the world to play in a lot of ways. The controls are a little bit mushy, especially when you're trying to take control of another Paradroid, because you have to switch into transfer mode, which is this thing here, which essentially means that any Paradroid you run into, you will start the transfer game with. But you can only activate that mode by holding the button down for about a second when you're not moving. So you got to make sure that you come to a full stop, and you have kind of a, as you can see, there's sort of a floaty stop. Now, I'm running low on health here, so I got to try to find a recharge station. Oh, bollocks. I may not be able to. Let's see if I can assume this guy, because I can assume some of his energy when I do that. And, of course, if you try to take over different Paradroids that are way above your pay grade, you may very well end up... I think he beat me there. You may end up playing a version of this minigame that is substantially harder and that may end up screwing you over. So there's a real risk-reward element to this game, which I think is really interesting. You can choose to be greedy and ballsy if you want, and that can pay very huge dividends if you pull it off. But if you do it wrong, you may end up really getting yourself in a bad way there. So I really, really like the way it goes about doing that. I think it can make things very challenging, but also accessible if you want to pace yourself. And you can plan out the way you want to attack the different decks and how you want to travel about it and what droids you want to take control of with, to do that with. And there's a lot to it. In addition to that, the decks will sometimes go under different what's called alert levels. And essentially higher alert levels, what that essentially is a multiplier. And that's how you're rewarded for going on to more difficult decks. So if you go on to a deck that has a higher alert level, you will gain higher points both for killing other robots or paradroids and for assuming control of them. So again, you can sort of stack that up here. And the game does have a high score table built in, so that's your incentive to try to get your score built up as high as possible. I really like this. I've never played a game quite like this before, and I mean, it ain't a looker by any measure. Even by Commodore 64 standards, the graphics and sound in this are very, very primitive, and there's basically no music. But this is one of those games where it really doesn't make much difference, because the mechanics of it are what make it cool and fun, not so much the... So this is an easy deck, because this one's just the cockpit, which you can see on the right there. That's what I think is really neat, is this game does not... it doesn't need high production value to be entertaining and to do cool and interesting stuff, and that's what I really like about it. I really like how you are rewarded for taking risks, and you're punished for being cautious in a lot of ways. You saw those sort of little stations there where I could recharge my health. Well, the downside to that, as you can see here, is it costs you. It'll cost you some points to heal yourself up. So that's pretty interesting. And the level variety is pretty good. I actually might have misspoke before. I don't necessarily think this game does use randomly generated levels, but there are a lot of levels in it. So you'll still get a lot of opportunity to explore and to sort of memorize things in that. There's certainly still no lack of depth or variety to it. And for that reason, I think it's really, really fun. Unfortunately, you want to get your hands on this game right now, it's going to be tricky. This was on the Wii Virtual Console at one point in time, but I just discovered recently, to my shock, when doing some research, that all the Commodore 64 titles on the Wii Virtual Console were delisted in August of 2013. So if you already own them, you can still get at your purchases, but you can't make any new purchases. I guess the license that Nintendo had with Commodore Gaming expired, and for reasons I can't begin to understand, they decided not to renew it. Maybe it wasn't making them a lot of money, I don't know, but that's a real shame. So if you want to play this, you're probably going to have to track yourself down a copy. It was a fairly popular game back in the day. I really don't know how I missed this, because I think I would have had a lot of fun with this as a kid. But it's out there. It was on the Commodore 64, the Amiga, the Atari ST, and the Acorn Archimedes, so it's not impossible to find. And in addition to that, I have not looked into this very heavily, but it did apparently come out on iOS in what's called the ZX Spectrum Elite Collection. This game was rebranded something else in the ZX Spectrum. It was called Quasitron, but it's basically the same game. And it was done by... This title was done by a single gentleman by the name of Andrew Braybrook, but this was done by a partner of his by the name of Steve Turner. The ZX Spectrum game, but it's still basically the same deal. So if you can, you might have an option to play it there, so at least you have that. But I really like this. This is a game that has a lot of depth and is accessible, but will really ramp up the challenge if you wanted to. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. So yeah, the game is Paradroid, developed by Andrew Braybrook and Graft Gold in 1985, published by Hewson Consultants. We're looking at the Commodore 64 version, but you can get it on a bunch of different titles, or a bunch of different platforms, I should say. And I like this quite a bit. It's different, and it's really fun, and it's really deep. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.